Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this really special webinar that we are having today, a collaboration between the Society of Wetland Scientists Africa chapter and the South African Wetland Society. We are here to, I'm sure, learn a lot, and I'm really excited for the two speakers that we've got today. So I'm just going to do a few housekeeping rules before I hand over to Alana Rebello, who will introduce the webinar and our speaker, or our first speaker. So please could I ask you, as I see many of you are already doing, introducing yourself and where you're from. That's really great. And if you have any questions for the speakers, I would really appreciate it if you could use the Q&A box or chat section in the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. And then after each presenter, we will give an opportunity to for your questions to be read out aloud and for the speaker to answer your questions. So we'll have a 10-minute question session after each speaker. And then if there are any other unanswered questions at the end, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Alana to introduce the webinar and talk a little bit about SWS Africa. And so thank you, Alana.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Alana Rebello, and I want to warmly welcome everybody that's joining us in this webinar, South Africans and people from all over Africa, and even some international people. So this is, people from off the continent. So this is really fantastic. Thank you for taking your lunch break to join us today. I'm going to start with a little bit of a background to SWS and an update, and I'll keep this quite short. And then I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can all see this.
It's coming through. Yes, thanks, Alana.
Thank you. Just let me know if there are any problems. I am a senior researcher at the Agricultural Research Council in South Africa, but I volunteer for SWS, the Society of Wetland Scientists, and specifically, I'm the chair of the Africa region. And as part of our annual outreaches and activities, we like to collaborate with SAWS, the South African Wetland Society, to produce at least one collaboratory webinar every year. And this is to just increase our network within Africa, and as a South African to look more broadly at what's happening on the continent and beyond. I just before we start, I just wanted to report back to the community because a large part of our members are within the SAWS community, the South African Wetland Society community. And for me, it's quite important as the chair of SWS-Africa to give feedback to this community. And so this is the first time actually this year that we will be just giving some feedback. So I'm just going to try and progress my slides. There we are. I just wanted to start by saying that I'm currently dialing in from Estonia, and I am attending the 12th Intercol Wetlands Conference, which is really exciting, as well as the local meeting of SWS Europe. So the European chapter has their meeting, and this is very exciting. I've already made fantastic connections, and it would be really great to get one of the Intercol, which is an international wetlands conference that happens every 3 to 4 years, to get that on the African continent. So we are working hard for that. Very exciting things to come. I'm not sure why my slides aren't progressing. Sorry, let me just do it manually. And so just to tell you a bit about the vision for SWS Africa, we wow, this is going to be slow. We are aiming to strengthen the wetland community of practice in Africa. And we are intending to do this via a regional approach. And we arrived at this method via extensive consultation. And we decided to work in regions where we already have critical mass and champions. And so the last couple of years, we focused heavily in West Africa, and now we're moving towards Southern Africa. More on that in a moment. We've been building up a committee over the last few years, and we've grown from just the one chair to a large committee with representation across Africa. So we've got people from Cameroon, we've got people from Ghana, as well as Lesotho and South Africa. And it's just such a fantastic team. We've done tons of stuff since I started in 2022. We've got awards and grants to strengthen our chapter. We've held workshops at our South African National Wetland in Durban. We've organized a training event in Nigeria. We've got a website and so on. And just some quick pictures from Nigeria. This was our course brochure. We had it was almost 40 attendees. These are some pictures. In short, it was just a fantastic success and such a cool collaboration. And we're still seeing the fruit of this today with these relationships continuing. You would have seen in the last SAWS webinar. And so now, as I mentioned, we're shifting towards the south. We are wanting to do some activities in South Africa where most of our members are. What is coming up ahead? We've got our National Wetlands in Durban in October this year. And one of our big actions is to try and bring participants from other African countries. So we're trying to raise funds to bring 4 to 5 people from Lesotho. So if you have some sponsorship and would like to support that, please get in touch with me. And we are also trying to bring one of the international wetland conferences to South Africa. And one thing I also wanted to just bring to people's attention, that should read 2026-27, but we're going to be having elections within the next year or so for a new chair to replace me. And so I'd like people to start to think about that. If you are interested to lead this ship, to reach out and think about it, and then put your hand up when we get to elections. So I also just wanted to, before we go back to the webinar, sorry, everything seems very manual here, to just say a little bit about the society, because I think not a lot of people know how it works. And I think that there's quite a lot of confusion. So this International Society of Wetland Scientists started in America, but their vision is to be an international society. And so there are chapters from all around the world. It's run by an executive board of presidents, treasurer, and secretary, and rotating members. And I am a member of the board as a chair of a chapter. I'm a co-chair of the international chapter. And that makes me your regional representative. And so if you've got questions or if you'd like to know more about the society, please reach out to me. I am your link to this international society. And then there are so many opportunities. And I just want to remind people, especially the South Africans that are in this presentation today or in this webinar, there are many opportunities and you get to leverage them, because as a member of the South African Wetland Society, you're also a member of the International Society for Wetland Scientists. And so your students, or if you are a student, you can access student research grants here on the website. There are awards, numerous society awards. We need to be nominating each other for this. Let's get some African awardees. So you can have a look at the eligibility criteria for the different grants here on the website, as well as the application packages. And then, of course, another big thing is the journals that we get access to. So the Wetlands Journal, you can publish in if you're a researcher. We also have the Wetland Science and Practice Journal, which is a journal for practitioners to publish their results, or if somebody wants to write a more an article with more of a narrative, this is a good place to do that. So I encourage people from Africa to make submissions to these. And then the webinars, there's a large number of webinars that you have access to, free access to through SAWS. And those that are not South Africans, you can get access to these webinars as well once they are published. So you can access the past ones for free online if you're not an SWS member. So just to say, the benefits are really huge. You are a member if you're part of SAWS, so please leverage these benefits. I want to just turn now to why we're all here today. And we had this vision for a webinar where we could invite some really great speakers from around Africa that are specifically working on wetland restoration and conservation. And we wanted to hear some stories from these wetlands in Africa. We wanted to be inspired. And so we've specifically chosen for you today some speakers that we think are charismatic and well respected. And so I'm particularly excited and honored to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Damian Walters of EWT. And he is a wetland ecologist with 2 decades of experience in applied wetland management, restoration, and capacity development. His primary interests are wetland agricultural interactions and restoration ecology. Currently, Damian is a senior conservation manager at EWT, as I mentioned previously, the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and manages the International Crane Foundation, or EWT partnership, in South Africa, and is also responsible for the partnership's wetland work throughout Southern and Eastern Africa. And known locally in South Africa for his great sense of humor, I'm very, very pleased to invite Damian Walters to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alana. Let me just video up momentarily so everybody can see what I actually look like as opposed to what I'm about to look like on my slides. But hi, everybody. Welcome. And I'll get on with my talk in a moment. Right, if I can just get a thumbs up from
Damian,
everybody or somebody.
Yeah, it's all good there. Good to go.
Fantastic. Right, hi, everybody. Welcome. As Alana said, my name is Damian Walters, and I work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and I manage a partnership called the African Crane Conservation Program, which is a partnership between the International Crane Foundation and the Endangered Wildlife Trust. As the name indicates, it's Africa-wide, and it's about cranes, not the ones that lift, the ones that fly, and we're a conservation program. And just my starting slide, just to give you guys a bit of an idea about the landscape that I work in. Many people think when we speak about wetlands of open water bodies, but not all of them like that, particularly in the areas that I work. And if you have a look just in front of you there, you'll see where the livestock with a... Hello.
Sorry. Oh, have you changed slide pages or are you still on your home page?
I'm still on my home page. Thanks.
Sorry, my mistake. I was just checking.
No.
Damon.
No, it's quite right. I was just telling people that typically this is the landscape that I sort of work in, and these are the sorts of land uses that we conserve cranes within. To give you an idea a little bit more about the 2 organizations there, the homepage of each organization, the Endangered Wildlife Trust on the left and the International Crane Foundation on the right. So if you want to Google stalk us, you can have a look at the work that we do. We're also on Instagram and all other various social medias. But what do we really do? Primarily, the program that I manage is about conserving cranes, and there are 15 species of cranes globally. 14 of those are entirely dependent on wetlands during at least some part of their life cycle. The one that you're looking at there is a wattle crane, and wattle cranes are endemic to Africa. There's quite a large population of them in sort of central southern Africa, Zambia, Mozambique, and in the Okavango Delta. There's a small population further north in Ethiopia. And then back here in SA, we've got a small population of about 300 odd birds, about 70 nesting pairs, and they are genetically disconnected from the other populations in Africa. The other crane species which we work to conserve within Africa are the grey and black crowned cranes. The grey crowned crane, it's their sort of heartland is in East Africa, but there's also a South African and a Southern African population. We've got about 6,500 of those here in South Africa, but the bulk of grey crowned cranes live in East Africa, particularly Kenya and Uganda. The black crane is they found large in West Africa, from West African kind of northwest Africa into the Sahel, and they are also entirely dependent on wetland systems. The one you're looking at here, if I didn't mention, is a wattle crane, one of our 72 nesting pairs, and you can see its chick sort of peeking its head out there from underneath the parent's wing. The way in which we work, essentially, first and foremost, we try to conserve large areas of intact habitat. We've learned that the least expensive, the most effective way to conserve biodiversity is by attempting to conserve large tracts of intact habitat, which are largely unimpacted, and conserve all the elements of biodiversity within them. We tend to use our 3 crane species here in Africa as sort of flagships for various landscapes, and we use them as a reason or a flagship species to conserve all the biodiversity associated with those landscapes within which they live. Occasionally, we do have to move into modified landscapes, and that means that now and again, we have to get involved with restoration, whether it's grassland or wetland restoration, and also sometimes managing wetland systems in highly impacted or highly utilized landscapes. And that's going to be, those 2 elements are going to be the basis to my talk. A little bit about me. I love being in wetlands, absolutely love it. It's my favorite thing to do. As a senior manager these days, I'm doing less and less of it. But as you can see from my photos, I really enjoy getting out there. I enjoy doing field work. I was lucky enough in my PhD to do a really broad PhD, which encompassed fluvial geomorphology, plant ecology, hydrology, and little bits of soil science. So that was me kind of doing sort of PhD stuff over there with a spade. On the left-hand side over there, you can see a big Nkole cattle. Can't see if it's a bull or a cow, but I bumped into that one while I was busy doing some wetlands assessments in Uganda. It's a beautiful animal, isn't it? And on the right-hand side, doing what I really also love, exploring wetlands and developing expertise around wetlands with people. There's no better way than to grow emerging wetland scientists, conservationists, by spending time in the field with people, getting to know their wetlands and getting to understand wetlands with them. Both of those photos are from East Africa, Uganda in the top one, and Western Kenya in the bottom. As Alana said, my primary interests are around restoration. I'm also very interested in agriculture-wetland interactions, how people, particularly small-scale agriculturalists, small-scale farmers, how they operate within wetlands, how they interact with wetlands, and what role small-scale agriculture plays in shaping African wetland systems. And all of this sort of background led me to working with cranes and joining the EWT about 4 years ago. And the key reason why I think the reason why they hired me was, well, because I'm a wetland ecologist, and that was a bit of a gap for them. And the other reason is that all 3, actually that's not entirely true. 3 out of the 4 African crane species are entirely dependent on wetland systems, and they all tend to nest in wetlands. And where there's agriculture and people and cranes, there's quite a large opportunity for conflict, or for at least cranes being impacted by how people use wetlands. Most of our cranes do not occur in nature reserves. Most of them are nesting in landscapes, shared with people, and people and wetlands have had a very long association. I think the longest recorded association of people and agriculture and wetlands are the Sarawak swamps in Southeast Asia, where there's records of a raised bed agriculture going back about 7,500 or 8,000 years. So people have intrinsically understood that wetlands are often a very good place to grow crops because of the inherent moisture and because of how fertile wetland systems can be. But when that's done on a very large scale, you can obviously start to lose the very valuable biodiversity and other ecosystem goods and services associated with wetland systems. I would just like to locate, well, let me perhaps first start by saying I'm going to talk through two fairly brief examples of the work that we do, case studies if you wish. And I just wanted to locate them in this diagram. This is borrowed from the SER, Society of Ecological Restoration. And the first case study is really quite wetland rehabilitation, getting onto sort of not quite ecological restoration, but more sort of rehabilitation. So that's where we're trying to repair ecosystem functioning. And the second one is going to be focused sort of more towards the left-hand side there on improving ecosystem management, mitigation of impacts, and through agriculture. I'm sure everybody's relatively familiar with this. If you're not, it's pretty useful, and it's contained in a resource freely available on the SER website. So the first one I'd like to briefly talk through is something which I was involved in before I started to work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust and the International Crane Foundation. Kind of dates back to a previous life of mine, or so to speak, where I worked for another NGO, WWF, and I was working with a South African government organization called Working for Wetlands, which was implementing wetland rehabilitation at quite a large scale nationally throughout SA. And coincidentally, I ended up working with their team on this wetland, the Kruisfontein wetland. Cross Fountain, I think, would be an English translation of that. And this is located on the east coast of South Africa. The river that you see flowing through it is the Mooi Rivier, the pretty river, if I can use English, which flows eastwards eventually into the Indian Ocean. And this wetland system that you're looking at here is fed by two streams coming in from the northwest, and bringing along with them, with water from those two streams, sediment that then gets deposited into this river floodplain, forming almost delta-like wetland systems. So a lot of that you see within the dashed green line, that is sort of the wetland boundary, is sediment brought down by those streams over some periods, and then obviously the main stem of the river overflowing and spreading sediment back into that wetland system. So it's very much a riparian system. And about 80 years ago, the landowner decided to drain this wetland system. And if you look quite carefully, you can see a whole mosaic of drains, a whole bunch of lines and drainage lines, and you can see these sort of little open water bodies over here. Sort of in this area here, one can see these open water pools, but you can see these sort of like these striations all within this wetland. And essentially what happened is that water that was flowing out of these two streams would spread across this wetland system, or it would be during times of flood, it would flow through shallow streams, and they would overtop and they would spread this wetland. This wetland would look very, very different to how it looks now. It would have had quite tall reeds in it, perhaps, or sedges, and perhaps in the drier area would have been a sedge meadow type system. And then this wetland system was drained and it was cultivated for about 30 to 40 years. And that altered this wetland system entirely. And working for water, the governmental organization at that stage, we came up with a plan to try to rehabilitate it. We didn't go for restoration, with the understanding is that there are innumerable thresholds which have been exceeded here. And thresholds, generally speaking, are a point along a scale from which, if you've altered a system too much, it almost becomes irreversible to put it back. And here the drainage systems were very deep, the natural stream channels had been completely altered, and the vegetation had been completely altered. There were pasture grasses, exotic pasture species were introduced. So this wetland looked very different, and the idea would be that we would block up the drains and spread the water back across the wetland, and from that point, roll the dice, or so to speak, and kind of hope for the best sort of recovery that could happen. It was a bit of a mixed bag, so I still keep an eye on this wetland system about 15, 16 years after restoration. I quite often go back, drive along this road, pop in, see the landowners and go in there, because we do have a pair of grey-crowned crane that either nest within the wetland or an adjacent wetland a little bit to the south. So one outcome of this was that previously cranes did not nest there, but subsequently we've certainly seen them nesting here, and sort of the cranes have come back. But restoration in this case, and it speaks to what I was talking about earlier, preferably we want to ensure that we don't lose wetland systems, that we rather conserve them, because of the cost and the unreliability of outcomes in restoration activities. So typically, these are the sorts of interventions. So this is the picture on the left with the Phragmites behind it is a weir with a berm towards the bottom end of the photograph, and those rather grim-looking picture on the right-hand side are these over here, which, so essentially a lot of water comes down the stream. There's a big diversion berm that pushes water all the way through this area again, and we withhold some of that water in the landscape into these areas over here. And these typically are the structures. And the thing about any sort of restoration activity like this, it's critically important that you get back occasionally to make sure that everything's intact. So if you think about our monitoring and evaluation that we would use for these wetland systems, if you can think of a triangle sitting, and at its base, the first question that we would ask are the interventions that we put in place, are they still there? And beyond that, are they still operating as we hoped? Are they still spreading water? Are they still arresting erosion? And then from there, we start to concern ourselves about the biotic response, and then other finer measures. In South Africa, most of our wetlands, working for wetlands worked in about 65 different wetland systems, if I can recall correctly. So this would be one of them. There's very, very little ongoing monitoring evaluation. There are certain interest groups that would go back now and again. And the EWT has got a handful of these wetland systems like this one, which we worked with the government to get restored. So naturally, they're of key interest to us, and we do go back to them. So it's just an example of perhaps one of the more intense forms of restoration activity which we would as an organization undertake, either ourselves or we'd work with partner organizations on. Yeah, we've done a number of these. We've got 4 different wetlands within the KZN Midlands that we've worked as part of a partnership to get restored. And all of them have resulted, from our perspective, in cranes coming back and nesting within those those wetland systems. So pretty successful, but quite an expensive way about doing crane habitat conservation. And then really on the kind of other extreme, and this is a wetland system in southwestern Uganda. It's really, really big. It's about 15 kilometers long, so from the sort of eastern side all the way down here. And you can see that it's, in terms of land use, there are quite a lot of cultivated fields within it. There are areas where there's harvesting vegetation, and there are a lot of people who depend on this wetland system on a day-to-day basis for food. So it's kind of a mix between sort of a semi-small scale commercial subsistence setup where people would retain some food and then some of their crops for food, for household consumption, and then they would perhaps sell or barter other bits. And this is very common across freshwater wetland systems throughout East Africa and into Southern Africa, perhaps with South Africa being a bit of an exception to that. So this sort of pattern that I'm going to show you is very common, even into West Africa. So something which perhaps doesn't make Africa entirely unique, but some way there is that we've still got a high dependence on our wetlands by people at a very basic subsistence level. For all those reasons that I alluded to earlier, wetlands are, if you're a farmer, wetlands are a great place to go and grow a crop, as long as you don't get flooded out. And just to give you some visuals for this, so the bottom right-hand picture over there is a typical wetland system that we work to try to conserve and work with people. You can see there's homesteads there in the background. We would work with people to try to conserve. Those are grey-crowned cranes, by the way, hanging around doing what grey-crowned cranes do. And the two top photos, well, the bottom left, just gives an idea what that substrate looks like. These are peat wetlands, and they're quite deep. I ran out of augers to be able to figure out how deep they were. I mean, I didn't have 5 meters of auger, at about 3, but I was able to recover at least 3 meters of peat. And you can see how people utilize them on the top left-hand photograph there. You've got these raised beds with sort of ditches, and they're not really drains, with ditches in between. So the whole idea is you don't necessarily drain, the farmers don't necessarily drain their wetlands, they raise the beds and completely alter the wetland surface. You know, its surface roughness is completely altered, and then they remove the vegetation and growing all sorts of things from onions to potatoes, Irish as they refer to their whole bunch of crops, beans and all sorts of things. If you have a look at some of those photos, you can sort of see the variety of crops there, and they're very important to the people who live there. Coming from South Africa, some of these landscapes are you know, they make parts of South Africa feel positively wild in terms of the number of people living around them, living around these wetlands, and in utilizing them compared to here. You can see those slopes in the left-hand picture. You know, people are growing bananas. You know, almost every inch of the landscape is used for agriculture. And typically the sort of work that we're doing here is far less about rehabilitation, but it's about making sure that the agriculture which is happening adjacent to these wetlands within these catchment areas is being done in the most resilient way possible, sustainable way possible. So we work with farmers to introduce soil conservation measures, cover crops to make sure that soil is covered for 365 days of the year, that you're reintroducing organic matter back into the soils to really, from an agricultural perspective, protect those agricultural lands, so that there's less risk that if there's problems with outside of the wetland, that people don't rush into the wetlands, and expand their agriculture. In these areas, at some times of year, 60, 70, even 80% of the wetlands can be cultivated. Fortunately, they're very resilient. And then we also work with agriculturalists within the wetland, encouraging people at the end of the growing season, for example, to block off their drains to raise the water. So managing the hydrology within these farmed areas, to do things like not burn crop residues, but to incorporate them back into the soil so that we reduce. Both of those mechanisms are a way of being able to reduce the loss of organic matter from these peatland systems, making sure that people don't put in large drainage systems that lead to large-scale changes to the hydrology and the hydraulics of these wetland systems. And then obviously encouraging people to leave fields open from time to time. You can actually see in the top left-hand, these are actually recovered fields where 18 months, 2 years later, the Cyprus latifolis sedge beds there, literally they come back and they grow very, very well. So these wetland systems are very resilient to cultivation, and our role there is to really try to enhance the long-term resilience of this type of agriculture within these landscapes, while seeing if we can leave spaces within these landscapes for our cranes to be able to exist. Looking towards the future locally within South Africa, we are looking at wattle crane habitat expansion. We have reached the point where we are pretty certain that we are nest site limited. And wattle crane, these two guys here, that's just a social interaction. They're not trying to murder each other. We've very limited nest sites. They've got very particular requirements for nesting within our wetlands that you don't often find. Wattle crane require open water bodies within wetlands to build their nest. They build like this floating, almost like this floating platform that they then lay 2 eggs on, hatch a single chick, and then ignore the other egg. There's a good reason why they are endangered. Not the best parents. But we've got very good reason to believe that we are now nest site limited, and what we're looking is going back to old known wattle site nest sites, and looking if we can do some restoration there. So that's pretty exciting. Also going forward, I'm going to be doing quite a lot of work in East Africa and Zambia. We want to partner with other organizations there to build expertise, not necessarily at sort of an academic level, but building a body of wetland field workers, practitioners who are very well versed in applied wetland science, who understand their wetlands and can make a meaningful contribution to wetland conservation within those areas. So the next 2 to 3 years, that's the kind of spaces that I'm going to be operating in. And for anybody who's doing similar sort of work, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you. And I'd like to thank SAWS and SWS for the invitation to talk to you guys. Hopefully not just talk at you. I really appreciate the opportunity. So Lana, Stephen, thank you very much.
As always, Damien, thank you so much for your insight, but also your sense of humor, as Lana alluded to earlier. It really makes for a great sense of levity of the sometimes quite serious topics that you talk about. And yeah, I think that we have time for some questions. I see that there is one question in the Q&A box so far. If you have questions, please do also pop them in there. So Mark, do you want to go ahead, or can I answer this question in the question and answer box first?
Well, no, you can, Stephen, answer it, and I'll come in second for a question if that's okay.
Cool. Okay. So Natalie Ace has asked a question. Has anyone reviewed the Working for Wetlands costs spent on the 65 sites? How many were successful, and how many of the sites still need post-care interventions? Damien, I don't know if you feel in a position to answer that question.
Shockingly well placed to answer that.
Right.
Coincidentally, I did a postdoctoral stint with Sanby, and we really looked at this quite a lot. And I don't have them at my fingertips, but we know where all the sites are, where all the interventions are, and post-implementation, what was the words you used? Post-implementation care, aftercare work. Aftercare work is probably the Achilles heel of that entire program. We went back and we did an evaluation of a whole bunch of sites to see what was happening, and the results were pretty remarkable. But you've definitely touched on a very important point around restoration and the notion that it's a journey, and the longest part of that journey is the aftercare component of it, and ensure, how do we do that? How do we ensure that landowners, that whoever the people who we think are responsible for the aftercare know it, are able to do it, and are doing it. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, and I can provide you with a lot of details sometime. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Damien. Mark?
Yeah, Damon, just quickly, following on from that question, what is your personal gut feeling about how well these physical interventions have done? I know you've mentioned that studies have done to look at it, and aftercare is the way to go. But I'm just trying to get a sense in myself, like you having been through the initial starting up of the Working for Water and then the Working for Wetlands program. That process of 30 years later, when you look back on it, does it sit well with you in terms of what we've needed to try and achieve? It's a bit of a broad brush answer.
It is,
but just an idea.
Can I have 3 minutes or 2 minutes to answer this?
Yeah.
As our understanding of our wetlands, their origin and evolution, to use Fred Ellery's terminology, has improved, and we've got to understand how our wetlands work. So has our understanding of what is required to do restoration or rehabilitation. And I think a lot of our early restoration action was done with the best intentions, but it was not as well informed as perhaps it would be now. And I think, and I know, we spent quite a lot of time intervening in inappropriate ways, in inappropriate places perhaps, but I saw that steadily improve over the past 20 years. And I think it's very, very important that we think about the diagnosis when we want to do restoration, diagnosing the problem, the drivers of change, and also looking at what realistic outcomes might look like is critically important. So being very realistic. Have we shot through a bunch of different thresholds and the system's never going to be able to revert to anything that resembles the range of natural variability for that system? And we've blown past that because we've introduced exotic species and too much drainage, or there's a timber, like in my opening slide, the catchment hydrology is altered. But also, equally importantly, are you actually diagnosing it correctly? Is that really a drain? Is that stream you're looking at, is it really 2 in size, whatever that means? Are we not intervening in natural processes? And then last but not least, guys, always remember, in rehabilitation, the biggest component of restoration is time since. That is your biggest factor. You can intervene, but in the fullness of time, restoration sort of happens. And there's a well-developed body of literature that kind of indicates that time since disturbance is very important, and being quite careful about how you intervene and thinking about the sustainability, and that you're working with the prevailing changes of the site, and you're not trying to work against the prevailing, the new state that the system's moving to.
Thank you, Damon. That's great. Appreciate it.
It's more than a mouthful.
Thanks, Damien. We got one more question from Donovan Kotzer, and then I'm going to ask Willem and Julie to, in the background, prepare for the next presentation. But yeah, for now, Damien. Don says, great presentation. And he's curious how well farmers have responded to suggestions for blocking drains, reducing burning crop residues, and increasing fallows, etc. I think speaking to your second example?
Sure, Don. Thanks for the question. Farmers generally won't do things that aren't in their best interest. And many farmers, like commercial farmers, subsistence farmers, are are fairly reluctant to try things until somebody else has. So you get some folk who are like incredibly enthusiastic and like, nah, they'll give it a wind and they give it a shot. And you get others who like want to see whether it's going to be a disaster or it's going to be something useful. Um, so so it's variable, but if you can get champions doing that sort of stuff and it is beneficial to the farmer, then you stand a chance. And then there's also differences in people. So I find working with East African farmers, they are far more inclined to try. They kind of respect authority or organizations or people who they feel are authoritative than, let's say, South African farmers of all types. Well, South Africans, full stop. We're not great in the authority. So there's a bit of there's quite a different dynamic between East Africa and, let's say, South Africa, for example. Uptake is slow but steady, but the more sort of agronomic focused stuff where people can see that it actually benefits them, cropping wise, yeah, uptake's reasonable. 30-40% is reasonable.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Damien, for that presentation. And if there are any other questions that have been left over, we can take them at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Willem to introduce our next speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. Damien, thank you very much. There's still a ton of questions, but I'll save those for later afterwards. I think we must move forward and introduce Dr. Julie Mulongo. We are very honored to welcome a truly inspiring leader in environmental conservation, Dr. Julie Mulongo, Director of East Africa at Wetlands International. Julie's journey began in childhood, witnessing the heartbreaking transformation of vibrant wetlands into lifeless waters. That early experience sparked a lifelong commitment to restoring these vital ecosystems. With over 30 years of experience and a PhD in climate change and adaptation, Julie has become a powerful voice for wetlands across Africa and beyond. She leads cross-border initiatives in the Great Rift Valley, the Nile Basin, and the Eastern African mangrove ecoregion, bringing together communities, scientists, and policymakers to protect wetlands as lifelines for both people and nature. Inspired by the grassroots leadership of Wangari Maathai and the resilience of local communities, Julie champions a model of conservation that is inclusive, science-driven, and deeply rooted in local empowerment. Today, she'll share her insights on the challenges and triumphs of wetland restoration, the role of women in environmental leadership, and why wetlands are essential to a sustainable future. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Julie Mulongo. Over to you, Julie.
Julie, if you want to unmute. Try again. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, Julie.
All right, fine. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. And thank you to SAWS and SWS for inviting me to make a presentation. So I'm really happy to be able to make this presentation. So really what I'm going to focus on today is mangrove restoration in Africa, and really focusing on Wetlands International approach to ecological and community resilience. So I work for Wetlands International, a global NGO, which is focused on conserving and restoring wetlands. So we have a website. In case you want to look us up, that's where we are. I am based in Eastern Africa, leading the Eastern Africa component. So we have offices in Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Uganda. Focus areas are on deltas and coasts, so in the Western Indian Ocean, peatlands, where we've done some work in the Nile River Basin, mostly focusing in Uganda, rivers and lakes, and the floodplains, really focusing on the Nile River Basin and the Rift Valley lakes and wetlands. So Wetlands International Eastern Africa works through partnerships with governments, communities, scientists, and civil society. So really, why do mangroves matter? Mangroves matter because, let me just reduce this screen so that you're able to see me well, and also switch off my camera. All right, so really, our mangroves matter because they're essential for our biodiversity and ecosystem services. They're essential because they have a lot of biodiversity and they also provide a lot of ecosystem services. They absorb wave energy, they prevent coastal erosion, and they actually store 4 times more carbon than our tropical rainforests. They're directly tied to local livelihoods, be it timber, be it honey production, be it fisheries. So when you come to Lamu in Kenya alone, mangroves are actually estimated to support livelihoods worth $85 million annually and sustain the livelihoods of about 800,000 artisanal coastal fishermen. So you can see they're really valuable ecosystems. However, there is a challenge. There's a lot of degradation due to overharvesting, urbanization, there's blocked tidal flows, there's pollution, sedimentation, and of course, you find a lot of policy gaps. And in Africa, it is estimated that we've lost over 20% of our mangroves in some areas in the past 30 years. Of course, some countries are recording even higher losses. Unfortunately, the communities often lack the capacity and incentives to protect these mangroves. And then, of course, mangrove restoration activities are mainly focused on planting, but studies indicate that 80% of global mangrove planting initiatives are prone to failure. So mangrove planting efforts can actually fail if they're planted where they never grew before. Sometimes you find they're planted on the mud flats, on sandy beaches. Sometimes you find that they're actually underwater too often and too long, maybe due to sea level rise or other factors. They fail if there's limited access to fresh water. Sometimes we think that mangroves only need salt water, but they actually also need fresh water. Or they're in places where there's no proper soil or water quality. And then they are also planted too densely or in places where there's high wave energy and erosion. So when we talk of mangrove restoration, we think of 3 things. We think, where should you restore the mangroves? What enabling conditions are required for restoration to be successful? And why you are restoring the mangroves. So I'll go through these one by one. So where should you restore mangroves? Really, you need to assess whether mangroves grew there before. Sometimes we want to plant mangroves where they were not. So it means we really have to conduct these site visits. We need our mapping tools. We need to really do really good studies. I had Damien saying we need to diagnose very, very well. If mangroves did not grow there before, avoid introducing them, because this could actually destroy other ecosystems. If there were mangroves, really find out what happened to the mangroves that were there. Why have they not recovered naturally? Was it charcoal burning? Was it rice farming? Really understand the causes of those losses, and whether that can be reversed. And then what enabling conditions are needed for restoration to be successful? I again repeat, understand the current conditions of your site, do a very good diagnosis, understand that site. If possible, study a nearby healthy site as a reference guide to really guide you. And then, of course, investigate the social factors. Sometimes we forget these social factors that actually hamper mangrove regeneration. Sometimes it's land tenure, it's land uses. Sometimes there's developments in that area that have come up. So really understand these issues. Sit down with the communities. Sometimes the communities have very good information about what's actually happening. And then the third thing, why are you restoring these mangroves? That's another thing. We really have to set very clear goals together with our stakeholders. The goals could be maybe I want to ensure my fisheries has improved. I want to enhance the biodiversity. I want coastal protection. So really understand that together with your stakeholders, your communities, go through that. And then really define the success criteria. What do you want to see at the end of it? And this is so that you can actually monitor it at the end of it. So our approach as Wetlands International is community-based ecological mangrove restoration, CBEMR. So here again, you diagnose the site, you'll see that I'm really repeating that because it's something that we really forget when we go to some of these sites. What's the tidal flow like? What's the salinity, the drainage? Then, of course, we are looking at restoring the hydrology, opening the blocked channels, and then we allow natural regeneration. This, of course, will involve seed dispersal, maybe by the tides. Then, of course, you're planting where necessary. If it is not working, then we can consider the enrichment planting to support the regeneration. Then, of course, check the sedimentation rates because you may be planting in an area where the sedimentation rates are too high. And that, of course, will suffocate our mangroves. And then are there other threats to mangrove regeneration? Look around, the cattle grazing. Sometimes you are doing that, yet there are threats which will actually not enable you to be able to ensure that regeneration actually happens. And most importantly, engage and train your local community leaders. So these are some of the things that we go through. So I'll give you two examples. One is in Kenya, where we work in Lamu and Tana Delta. We found that when we look at the potential for mangrove restoration, Kenya actually holds significant mangrove restoration potential. Over 1,600 hectares that have been completely lost have been identified for recovery. So really, when we went in there, when we went in with the CBMR approach, we found that we could actually we've actually managed to restore 116 hectares using CBMR, and this is over a period of 1 year. Other people may quote higher figures, but for us, it's 116 hectares over a period of 2 years. And 38,000 plus hectares are actually under improved co-management by the communities and the Kenya Forest Service, which is in charge of this, either through management planning, patrolling, training, awareness raising, and of course, supporting alternative livelihoods. And then, of course, what we've done is we've made sure that we've translated the restoration handbooks into the local languages and distributed this. And this has also helped in terms of working with the local communities. And then we've ensured that we've trained the communities as CBMR champions. And as you can see, the communities actually appreciate it. And you can see a comment there by one of the communities. We have learned that if a site has a challenge with hydrology, we correct that first to allow water to flow. And that brings in oxygen and other nutrients while allowing for a balance in salinity and the soils to drain well. Today, we mimic what nature does. And then, of course, you can see we engage the local communities. You can see some of them there being taught how to check the salinity levels. This is a demonstration site that we've been working in called Kitangani in Lamu. So here is when we started. You could see there was water that was stationary there. But after draining, after correcting the hydrology, ensuring there was drainage, digging out the channels, this is what it looked like in September 2022. Then I had a picture for March 2025, which shows actually some of the mangroves starting to come back. So really, this shows that it actually works. But of course, you have to be patient. And then, of course, we combine this with livelihood support, beekeeping, crab fattening. So ensuring that we also keep at the back of our minds, success is not just the number of trees, but the systems that protect them. For these communities, we also have to ensure that their livelihoods are taken care of. Then, of course, we have a mangrove restoration calendar. We've made sure we have that because it provides insights into the species availability, seedling monitoring, the restoration methods. So that has taken some time to actually put together. And then, of course, we've on that calendar, we've shown things to do with natural zonation, mangrove life cycles from tree to seed, and then, of course, reinforcing restoration initiatives for different species. So this has been created in collaboration with the local communities and development partners. So, of course, it also incorporates indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge. So I think this is something that has also worked for us. And then, of course, together with that, we have to ensure that the policies are enhanced. So supporting policymakers to institutionalize the best practice mangrove restoration within the governments. So we provided our advice for the National Mangrove Ecosystem Restoration Guideline, which incorporates the CBEMR approach, which has now been finalized and validated. Then, of course, we supported the inclusion of mangrove conservation and restoration targets in the Kenya's NBSAPs. And then we supported the establishment and operationalization of national mangrove management committees and also the subnational ones, which we call the county. And then, of course, in Guinea-Bissau, the same has been done. And here, over 2,600 hectares of mangroves in abandoned rice fields have been restored. 3,000 community members, park agents, and local agents have been engaged. And then over 10,000 women, children have actually experienced enhanced livelihoods through promotion of these savings and loan groups and sustainable mangrove-friendly economic activities. Then, of course, you have to think of sustaining these mangrove restoration efforts. So really what has worked for us? So one, engaging the communities and the stakeholders, and then breaking that cycle of mangrove destruction and declining incomes. So creating these sustainable livelihood activities. So this really strengthens the business case for restoration. In Wetlands International, we've developed what is called the by rights approach. In case you need a more information, I can share that. And then engaging the youth through the school environmental clubs, and then engaging the local governments, empowering the communities to engage more, and continuous monitoring of the sites using the remote sensing data. We have the Global Mangrove Watch, and then, of course, engaging also the local communities, the universities, the students, and practitioners in monitoring. So I'm coming to an end. I can see time is far gone. And then some of the lessons we've learned: restore the water flow first. It drives the natural regeneration. Build community ownership. Long-term impact depends on the local buy-in. Use science and monitoring, so measure salinity, sedimentation, growth. Avoid that one size fits all. Tailor your techniques to each site. And then restoration is ongoing. It's a long-term commitment. It's not a one-off event. So really, you can't sit down, do it today, and expect to see results tomorrow. And then, of course, we say measure success against return of suitable conditions for mangroves, such as hydrology, and then growth and diversity of the mangroves, return of biodiversity, return of ecosystem services like flood protection and livelihoods. Mangroves can actually return in 5 years, but the ecosystem services may take more, will take, not may, but will take more than 5 years to recover. So in conclusion, the CBMR approach puts nature and people at the center, which is good. It's proven, it's a scalable model that respects not only ecology, but empowers the communities. Success is a partnership story: local voices, scientific rigor, and policy support. And then CBMR is not new. It's, I mean, if you look in the literature, it's been there for very long. So I'm not selling something or trying to talk about something that started just the other day. It's been there for quite some time. So thank you very much, and sorry for rushing through the last few slides. Yeah, and I'm open for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Julie, for your really insightful and very eloquent presentation. Yeah, I really appreciated you sharing with us. We have a few questions and comments. Lots of congratulations and appreciation for the work that you have done. We have one question so far from Desri Sehlapelo, who asks, in Kenya, I think in the Kenyan example, which tools did you use for indigenous knowledge extraction? And they also just want to say thumbs up for translating info into Swahili and ensuring the systems are integrated.
All right, so thank you very much for that question. So we use a blend. So we use participatory methods, we use digital tools. So participatory rural appraisal, the PRAs, learning and action. We use focus group discussions. We use transect walks, and these are mostly co-led by the community members. So we use a range of them, depending on the community that we are working with. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Great presentation. Just wanted to ask if you have any insights with the work that you've done, not specifically just with the mangroves, but the work that you've been involved in over the years. Have you seen a successful translation of the institutional knowledge of the people that have been currently trained on the wetland conservation practices that you've put in place to the next generation? Is there any ability to look at that link in terms of generational understanding of what's been done? Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. I must say that has been a challenge. I've not, I mean, sometimes we bring the communities together, maybe to do storytelling and things like that. But I must admit that it's something that we still need to work on much better. We're losing a lot of what was developed before. So maybe what I'd say, it's something that we need to work on. Yeah, it's still something that we need to work on. Okay.
Thanks very much, Julie. Appreciate the feedback.
Julie, we have another question from, I believe it's Donovan Kotza. Yeah, and also again, just thanking you for very interesting presentation and inspiring work. But they were wondering if you have found a big difference in the ease of restoring mangroves, depending on the historical impacts of mangroves. So perhaps if there was rice farming in that mangrove, or perhaps it was just clear felling for timber. Have you found a difference in the ease of restoring those mangroves depending on the historical activities or impacts?
Yes, there is a difference. Yeah, sometimes you find that the recently disturbed sites are the restoration there is much easier. Where there's been agriculture, for example, where the abandoned rice fields, the salt pans, the shrimp ponds, those are moderate to difficult. Because of the altered hydrology, you find there are canals there are dikes. The soil has been, there's a lot of soil acidification. There's loss of the natural propagules. So there it's a bit harder because you have to breach those dikes. You have to engage the communities much more. So yes, there is a difference where there's infrastructure, for example, where there are settlements, the restoration is very, very low because there are permanent physical barriers. The soil has been compacted. There's more pollution. There's fragmented patches. So really, there's a lot of difference depending on what the history is. Yeah.
Willem, do you want to go ahead with your question? I can't see any others.
That would be great. Thanks, Stephen. Julie, thank you so much. That's so insightful. Your engagement with the communities is really great to see. I realize your focus is probably on the mangroves and the delta systems close to the coast. I was just curious if you guys do you have any work busy on the inland systems? I'm thinking about the Rift Valley and those massive floodplain systems like the Columbero floodplains with their lateral floodplains flanging them. There's so much agricultural issues, wetland versus agricultural issues in those systems. Have you done any work in those areas? Because I think your approach could lean itself greatly towards those systems, which is in dire need of some form of rehabilitation or increasing functionality.
True. Yes, good question, William. Yes, we have done work there. I think biggest success stories are in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia. So we've done some work there on restoration. So I can share that after this in case you're interested. So we've not only worked at the coast. I picked the coast because I felt that if I mix everything, then my presentation would be too long. But I'd also be happy to share what we've done in the inland systems. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
And perhaps I have one question, if that's okay, Julie. I've seen quite a lot of documentation on the effect of upstream dams on estuarine areas and mangrove distribution, particularly in northern Mozambique. But I'm curious to know if there are any major hydroelectric or dam schemes in Kenya which may affect the flood frequency of downstream mangroves, and whether or not that might be a large contributing factor to the decrease in freshwater entering into these estuarine systems and these mangrove systems as well.
Good question. Yes, indeed. If you look at the Tana Delta in Kenya, where we are working, there's actually a huge dam that is proposed. A few years ago, we did a TIB study to be able to determine some of the impacts of this dam. So indeed, we found that if this dam was put in place, there'd be issues such as reduced freshwater flow, decreased sediment, altered flood pulses, of course, which would affect the mangroves downstream. So it is a concern of ours, and it's something that we still work with the governments on to see how we can address this. So it's not only dams. You also find in Lamu, there's a huge port coming up, which has, of course, led to clearing of a lot of the mangroves in that area. So it's issues we experience not only in Kenya, the same is also happening, I think, as you know, in Mozambique, it's happening in Tanzania. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think, yeah, there are no further questions. And just lastly, to say thank you again to both Dr. Damien Walters and Dr. Julie Mulonga for talking with us and answering our questions and just sharing your knowledge with us. I am going to hand over quickly to Mark to do the closing. Thank you.
Stephen, thanks. I wasn't going to do the closing. I was just going to ask if I could please take a minute to give a shout out to the National Wetlands Indaba. So if I could just share my screen quickly, Stephen, to get that going. Just to remind everybody, the registration process for the National Wetlands Indaba for 2025 started yesterday. We've got some 15 weeks, 3 days, 18 hours, and 8 minutes to go until we start the event. But you can start registering. The details are on the National Wetlands Indaba website page, nationalwetlandsindaba.org. I've also posted it in the chat. Just note that the system uses the glue-up system to register. So if you click on the top right-hand corner and you go to register, you will be taken to the actual registration page with similar information. And here, you'll click on tickets to have a look at the prices that we've got for the event. We've got day visitors, students, also full delegates, as well as early bird, standard and late delegations as well. So please have a look at the website. It is early days yet that we've started sending out the registration notification, but if you guys are keen and wanting to attend, please head along and register as soon as you can. It will help with the process. Stephen, thank you very much for the 1 minute shout out.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, and just to echo Mark, it really is a fantastic platform to network and meet other people in the wetlands field. So would really encourage everyone to consider coming, even if it's just for 1 day, especially if you are in Gauteng. So yeah, I think that this would be a really good note to close on. Thank you to Alana and Willem for co-hosting with us. And thank you all for attending, giving up your lunch break to be here with us. And our next webinar, there's a link that Mark has also posted in the chat. Please do consider attending. It's about wetland offsetting as a policy tool for sustainable wetland management. And it is presented by one of our well, we've actually had a number of off-continent presenters, but this is from Professor Larry Swatuk from the University of Waterloo. So I'm sure it's going to be a great and insightful presentation. But yeah, without further ado, thank you so much. Cheers, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Everyone.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Be safe.